job posting had been simple enough. Night watchman needed for abandoned hospital property. Minimal qualifications required. Above market pay. When money got tight and bills started piling up, he had applied without a second thought. The interview had been brief, conducted in a coffee shop rather than at the property itself. The hiring manager, a thin woman with graying hair and tired eyes, had asked only basic questions before sliding a contract across the table. She mentioned the rules only once, saying he would receive them on his first night. Her expression when she said it had been unreadable, somewhere between apologetic and resigned. The hospital loomed against the night sky like a monument to forgotten suffering. St. Catherine's Medical Center had closed its doors 15 years ago after a series of scandals and financial troubles. The building had sat empty ever since, too expensive to demolish, and too tainted by reputation to repurpose. 4 stories of dark windows stared down at him as he pulled into the empty parking lot. Weeds pushed through cracks in the asphalt. A chain link fence surrounded the property, but the gate stood open, as he had been told it would be. He grabbed his duffel bag from the passenger seat and approached the main entrance. The glass doors were intact, but filthy, obscured by years of accumulated grime. A hand-written sign taped to the inside read, "Security Office, First Floor, West Wing." He tried the door and found it unlocked. The hinges screamed as he pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty lobby beyond. The interior smelled of mildew and something else, something medicinal that had soaked into the walls over decades of use. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a reception desk covered in dust, overturned chairs, and a hallway stretching away into blackness. The beam of light seemed inadequate against the vast darkness of the building. Every surface was covered in a thick layer of dust. Old medical posters hung crooked on the walls, their edges curled and yellowed. The security office was exactly where the sign had indicated. The door stood open, and inside he found a metal desk, a rolling chair with cracked vinyl upholstery, and a wall of security monitors. Most of the screens showed only static, but a few displayed grainy black and white feeds from various parts of the hospital. A desk lamp provided the only light in the room, casting long shadows into the corners. On the desk sat a thermos of coffee, still warm, and a clipboard with a single sheet of paper attached. The paper was titled "Night Watchman Protocols" in neat, handwritten text. Below the title, someone had written a list of rules. The handwriting was precise, but appeared rushed in places, as if the writer had been anxious to finish. He picked up the clipboard and began to read. Rule 1 stated that he must remain in the security office between the hours of 11 p.m. and 6 m unless performing required rounds. The rounds were to be conducted once per hour at the top of each hour and should take no longer than 20 minutes to complete. The route was specific, covering the main hallway of each floor in sequence, from the first floor to the fourth. Rule 2 instructed him never to enter any patient rooms during his rounds. If a door to a patient room was open, he was to close it from the hallway without looking inside. Under no circumstances should he enter any room marked with a red symbol on the door. Several rooms throughout the hospital bore this marking, and they were to be avoided entirely. Rule 3 was unusual. If he heard voices during his rounds, he was to ignore them completely. The building was empty, the rule reminded him. Any voices he heard were not real and should not be acknowledged or investigated. He should continue his rounds at a normal pace without stopping. Rule 4 specified that he must never use the elevator. The stairwells at the east and west ends of each hallway were the only acceptable means of moving between floors. The elevator had been permanently disabled, and the doors should remain closed at all times. If he found the elevator doors open, he was to report it in the log book, but not approach or attempt to close them himself. Rule 5 dealt with the fourth floor specifically. His rounds on the fourth floor should be conducted as quickly as possible while still being thorough. He was not to linger or stop walking for any reason while on the fourth floor. The psychiatric ward had been located on this floor during the hospital's operation, and it required special attention. Rule 6 stated that if he saw another person in the building, he should return to the security office immediately and lock the door. He was to remain locked inside until his shift ended, regardless of what he heard or saw on the monitors. The building was supposed to be empty, and any person he encountered should be considered a trespasser and potentially dangerous. Rule 7 addressed the basement level. He was forbidden from entering the basement for any reason. The stairwell doors that led down below the first floor were to remain locked at all times. If he found a basement access door unlocked or open, he was to lock it immediately and note it in the logbook. The final item on the list was not numbered like the others. It simply stated that the previous night Watchman had lasted 3 weeks before resigning without notice. The position had been vacant for 2 months since then. No explanation was provided for this information, but its inclusion at the end of the rules felt deliberately ominous. He set the clipboard back on the desk and checked his watch. 10:45 p.m. His shift had officially begun 15 minutes ago. The coffee in the thermos was decent, and he poured himself a cup while studying the security monitors. Most of the functioning cameras showed empty hallways and dark rooms. One monitor displayed the main lobby he had just walked through. Another showed a hallway lined with patient rooms, their doors closed. A third showed what appeared to be a nurse's station, the desk still cluttered with old papers and abandoned coffee mugs. The building settled around him with creaks and groans. Old structures made noise, he knew, expanding and contracting with temperature changes, structural stress. The wind pushing against walls and windows. He had worked security before at a warehouse. Buildings were never truly silent. He repeated this to himself as he sipped his coffee and watched the unchanging views on the monitors. At 11 p.m. exactly, his watch beeped. Time for the first round. He grabbed his flashlight, made a note in the logbook about beginning his patrol, and stepped out of the security office into the dark hallway. The first floor hallway stretched away in both directions from the security office. He turned left, heading toward the east wing as the round's instructions had specified. His footsteps echoed on the tile floor. Doors lined both sides of the hallway, most of them closed. Placards next to each door indicated what the rooms had been used for. Examination Room 3, Storage, Medical Supply, Staff Break Room. The beam of his flashlight played across each door as he passed, confirming they were closed. Halfway down the hallway, he noticed one of the patient room doors standing open. The darkness beyond the doorway seemed thicker somehow, resistant to his flashlight beam. He approached cautiously, remembering Rule 2, close open doors from the hallway without looking inside. He reached for the door handle, deliberately keeping his eyes on the door itself rather than the room beyond. The handle was cold under his palm. He pulled the door shut quickly. The latch clicked into place with a sound that seemed too loud in the silence. He continued his round, moving to the stairwell at the end of the hallway. The metal door to the stairwell opened with a grinding shriek of hinges. The stairwell was concrete and metal, utilitarian and echoing. He climbed to the second floor, his footsteps ringing on the metal stairs. The second floor was similar to the first, a long hallway with closed doors on either side. The air felt colder here, and his breath misted slightly in the beam of his flashlight. He walked the length of the hallway at a steady pace, checking that doors remained closed. Seeing nothing unusual at the far end, he entered the stairwell again and climbed to the third floor. The third floor hallway was darker than the others. Several of the emergency exit lights that provided minimal illumination on the lower floors were burned out here. His flashlight beam seemed weaker, as if the darkness was actively pushing back against the light. He moved down the hallway, counting doors as he passed. One of the doors bore a red symbol painted on its surface, a circle with 3 lines through it, meaning unclear. He gave that door a wide berth, walking closer to the opposite wall as he passed it. The fourth floor was where the discomfort truly began. The stairwell door opened onto a hallway that felt fundamentally different from the others. The smell was worse here, decay and old chemicals mixing into something nauseating. The doors on this floor had small windows set at eye level, reinforced with wire mesh. The psychiatric ward. He walked quickly, as Rule 5 had instructed, keeping his eyes forward and his pace steady. He did not look through any of the door windows. He did not want to see what the rooms beyond contained, even if they were empty. Something scraped behind one of the doors as he passed. A sound like metal dragging across concrete. He kept walking, fighting the urge to speed up or run. Maintain a normal pace, the rules had said. Draw no attention. Make no acknowledgement. He reached the end of the hallway and the stairwell door beyond with relief. The descent back to the first floor took only a few minutes. He returned to the security office and logged the completion of his first round. 11:22 p.m. Nothing unusual to report, he wrote, though the scraping sound on the fourth floor repeated in his memory. The second round at midnight passed without incident. The third round at 1 a.m. revealed another open door on the first floor, which he closed without looking inside. By the fourth round at 2 a.m., he had almost relaxed into the routine. The building was creepy, certainly, but it was just an empty hospital, old and abandoned and full of shadows, but empty nonetheless. At 2:30 a.m., sitting in the security office, he noticed movement on one of the monitors. The camera showing the third floor hallway, the same hallway he had walked just 30 minutes ago, displayed a figure standing motionless in the center of the frame. The image quality was poor, grainy, and washed out, but the shape was unmistakably human. Someone was in the building. Rule 6 stated his course of action clearly. Return to the security office and lock the door. Stay inside until the end of his shift. But he was already in the security office. He locked the door, the bolt sliding home with a solid thunk. Then he returned to the monitors, searching for the figure again. The third floor hallway was empty now. He studied the other functioning monitors, looking for any sign of the person he had seen. Nothing. Every screen showed empty hallways and dark rooms. He checked his watch. 2:38 a.m., 3.5 hours until his shift ended. He settled into the chair to wait, keeping his eyes on the monitors. At 3 a.m., when he should have been conducting his next round, he remained in the locked office. The rules had been explicit. If he saw another person, he was to stay locked inside. He made a note in the logbook. Possible trespasser sighted on third floor camera at 2:30 a.m. Remaining in security office per Rule 6. The building seemed to grow louder as the night progressed. Creaks and groans that had been occasional became constant. Something was moving through the hallways above him, footsteps that echoed down through the ceiling. He told himself it was settling sounds, or perhaps an animal that had gotten inside. But the footsteps had a deliberate quality, a rhythmic pattern too regular to be random. At 4 a.m., the footsteps stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise had been. He watched the monitors intently, waiting for something to appear on one of the screens. The cameras showed nothing but empty spaces. 4:15 a.m. A sound outside the security office door, a soft scratch, like fingernails on wood. He turned off the desk lamp, plunging the office into darkness, except for the faint glow of the monitors. The scratching continued for several minutes, then stopped. He waited in the dark, barely breathing, listening. Nothing. No more sounds. No movement on the monitors. He left the lamp off and sat in the dim glow of the screens, counting down the minutes until 6 a.m., when daylight finally began filtering through the grimy windows and his shift officially ended. He unlocked the door and left the security office quickly. The drive home through the early morning light felt like surfacing from deep water, the normal world of traffic and streetlights, and people seemed impossibly distant from the dark hallways of St. Catherine's. He slept poorly through the day, his rest interrupted by dreams of endless corridors and figures that stood just beyond the reach of his flashlight. When he woke in the late afternoon, he considered not returning for his second night. The pay was good, but not good enough for whatever he had experienced. Yet bills needed paying, and jobs were not easy to come by. He returned that night, telling himself it had just been first night nerves. The second night began the same way. Arriving at the empty hospital, entering through the screaming front doors, making his way to the security office, the clipboard with the rules sat on the desk, exactly where he had left it. The coffee in the thermos was fresh and warm again, though he had no idea who was providing it. He conducted his 11 p.m. round without incident. The midnight round was similarly uneventful. He was beginning to think the previous night had been an anomaly, his imagination working overtime in an unfamiliar environment. The 1 round changed his assessment. As he walked the second-floor hallway, he heard the voices. They came from behind one of the closed doors, multiple people speaking in low tones. He could not make out words, just the murmur of conversation. Rule 3 was clear: ignore any voices. Do not investigate. Do not acknowledge. The building was empty. He kept walking, maintaining his pace even as the voices grew slightly louder behind him. They followed him down the hallway, always seeming to come from just behind the nearest door. When he reached the stairwell and began climbing to the 3rd floor, the voices stopped. The 3rd floor hallway contained another open door. He approached it, preparing to close it without looking inside, as Rule 2 instructed. As his hand touched the door handle, something moved in the darkness of the room beyond. A shape shifting from one shadow to another. He yanked the door closed and stepped back. His heart hammered in his chest. The building was supposed to be empty. He completed the round, his nerves frayed. The 4th floor psychiatric ward felt more oppressive than the previous night. The air was heavier, harder to breathe. He moved through quickly, keeping his eyes forward. Behind several of the doors, he heard movement, shuffling sounds, the scrape of something being dragged. He did not slow down or investigate. Back in the security office, he reviewed the rules again. Never enter patient rooms. Ignore voices. The building is empty. Any people seen are trespassers. He was following the rules, but the building seemed to be escalating regardless. He considered the phrase at the end of the rules list. The previous watchman had lasted 3 weeks. What had happened at the end of those 3 weeks to make him resign? The 2 a.m. round revealed more open doors, 3 of them on the first floor, 2 on the second. He closed each one, fighting the growing conviction that something was opening them behind him. The hospital was not empty. Regardless of what the rules claimed, something was here with him, moving through the same hallways, staying just out of sight. At 3 a.m., he saw the figure again on the monitors. This time it appeared on the second floor hallway camera. The image was clearer than the previous night. A person in what looked like a hospital gown, standing completely still in the middle of the hallway, facing the camera directly. The face was a pale blur, features indistinct in the low-quality image. He looked away from the monitor, consulting Rule 6 again. Remain in the office if another person is seen. Do not leave until the shift ends. He was already following that instruction. When he looked back at the monitor, the figure was gone. The rest of the night passed in tense vigilance. He remained locked in the office, watching the monitors, listening to the sounds of the building. Footsteps above, doors opening and closing, the distant sound of voices. He did not conduct his 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. rounds, choosing to follow Rule 6 instead. The logbook entry noted his reasoning. Multiple possible trespassers observed, remaining secured in office per instructions. The third night, he arrived prepared. He had brought additional batteries for his flashlight and a thermos of his own coffee. Some small illusion of control over his environment. The rules waited on the clipboard as always. He read through them again, looking for any detail he might have missed. The 11 p.m. round was standard. The midnight round revealed 4 open doors, which he closed mechanically, no longer bothering to feel surprised. The 1 a.m. round brought him face to face with the first major violation of the rules. On the 3rd floor, he found the elevator doors standing open. The cables were visible in the shaft beyond, disappearing up into darkness and down into the basement below. Rule 4 stated he should report open elevator doors in the logbook, but not approach them. He made his report mental, backing away from the elevator slowly. The shaft seemed to exhale cold air that smelled of earth and rust. He completed the round and returned to the office to make his log entry. At 1:45 a.m., while he was writing, all of the security monitors went to static simultaneously. The screens filled with white noise. He tried the controls, attempting to switch camera feeds or reset the system. Nothing changed. The monitors remained useless, showing only flickering static. Without the cameras, he had no way to monitor the building from the security office. He could not see if anyone was in the hallways or approaching his location. The small room suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a trap. He kept the door locked and the lights off, sitting in the darkness with only the static glow of the dead monitors for illumination. At 2 a.m., when he should have started his next round, he remained in the office. Going out into the hallways without the ability to check the cameras first seemed foolish. He listened instead, trying to track sounds through the building. The footsteps were more numerous now, coming from multiple directions. Above him, to the sides, behind the walls. He could not tell if they were coming closer or moving away. 2:30 a.m. A sound directly outside his door, not scratching this time, but breathing. Slow and wet, like someone with fluid in their lungs. He remained perfectly still in his chair, not making a sound. The breathing continued for 5 minutes, then 10. Then it stopped abruptly, replaced by footsteps moving away down the hallway. At 3 a.m., the monitors flickered and suddenly showed images again. But the views were wrong. The cameras were displaying angles of the hallways he had never seen before. Extreme close-ups of doors, tilted views of floors and ceilings. One monitor showed what appeared to be the inside of a patient room, though he had never seen a camera feed from inside a room before. The image of the room interior held his attention. A hospital bed with restraints still attached. Medical equipment knocked over and scattered. Walls covered in something dark that could have been old blood or mold or both, and standing in the corner of the room, barely visible in the darkness, a figure in a hospital gown, watching the camera. The face was still indistinct, but he had the unmistakable sense that the figure was aware of being observed, that it wanted to be seen. He looked away from that monitor and focused on the others. The hallway views were stabilizing, returning to their normal angles. When he checked the room interior monitor again, it showed only static. The 4 a.m. round had to be conducted despite his reluctance. The rules specified rounds at the top of each hour, and he had already missed the 2 a.m. patrol. He unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway, flashlight ready. The first floor was worse than he expected. Every single door stood open. Patient rooms, supply closets, examination rooms, all of them gaping onto the hallway like mouths. He moved down the corridor, aware that closing all of them would take far longer than the 20-minute maximum for rounds. He closed the first few doors he passed, but as he moved deeper into the hallway, he realized something was wrong. The doors he had already closed were opening again behind him. He could hear them swinging open one after another, a sequence of clicks and creaks following him down the hall. He stopped closing doors and simply moved forward, completing his route as quickly as possible. The second floor hallway was dark. Every emergency exit light had gone out, leaving only his flashlight to push back the blackness. The voices were louder here, no longer muffled behind doors, but seemingly surrounding him. Whispered conversations just at the edge of comprehension. He kept walking, Rule 3 echoing in his mind. Ignore the voices. They are not real." A laugh came from his left, from inside one of the rooms. Clear and loud and unmistakably human. He did not stop. He did not investigate. He maintained his pace and continued toward the stairwell. The third floor held a new horror. The elevator doors were not just open now, but the car itself was visible, stopped at this floor. The interior light was on, a sickly yellow glow spilling out into the hallway. He gave it a wide berth, walking along the opposite wall. As he passed, he made the mistake of glancing into the elevator car. Someone was inside. A figure standing in the corner, facing away from the doors. Hospital gown hanging loose from thin shoulders. The figure began to turn toward him. He looked away before he could see its face and hurried to the stairwell. The fourth floor psychiatric ward was a nightmare of sound and movement. Behind every door, something was active. Banging, scraping, screaming. The small windows in the doors showed only darkness, but shapes moved in that darkness. Faces pressed against the glass from the inside, pale and distorted. He walked as fast as he could without running, following Rule 5. Do not linger on the fourth floor. Do not stop for any reason. One of the doors rattled in its frame as he passed, something on the other side testing the lock. Another door had a handprint on the glass of its window, fingers splayed. The print was on the inside of the glass, but it looked fresh, the smudge of oils still visible. He reached the far stairwell and descended 3 flights in a controlled fall, taking stairs 2 at a time. Back in the security office, he slammed the door and locked it. His hands were shaking. 4:30 a.m. An hour and a half until his shift ended. He could survive an hour and a half. He sat down at the desk and focused on his breathing, trying to calm his racing heart. The monitors showed chaos. Every hallway was now filled with figures. They stood motionless, facing the cameras, hospital gowns hanging from emaciated frames. Patients. That was what they looked like. The patients that St. Catherine's had treated before it closed. But that was impossible. The hospital had been empty for 15 years. Unless it had never actually been empty, the figures began to move on the monitors, slowly at first, then with more purpose. They were walking through the hallways, opening doors, examining rooms, searching. He realized with cold certainty what they were searching for. They were looking for him. 5 a.m. 1 hour left. The sounds outside the security office had grown into a cacophony. Footsteps, voices, things being dragged across floors. The door handle rattled but held against the lock. Someone knocked. 3 slow, deliberate impacts that echoed in the small office. A voice spoke from the other side of the door. Female, rasping, like words forced through a damaged throat. "Security, please help. I am hurt." The same voice he had heard in his nightmares during the day. The voice from the dreams he could not quite remember upon waking. He did not answer. He did not move. The building was empty. The rules had said any voices were not real. But the rules had also said that any person he saw should be considered a trespasser. The rules contradicted themselves, and he did not know which instruction to follow. The voice spoke again. "I know you hear me. I can feel you listening. Let me in. It is cold out here in the hallway. I have been cold for so long." There was a plaintive quality to the words that almost made him respond. His hand moved toward the door lock of its own accord. He snatched his hand back. This was a test, or a trick, or both. He remained silent and still, waiting for 6 a.m. 5:30 a.m. The scratching at the door had been replaced by a softer sound. Crying. Someone on the other side of the door was sobbing quietly. He hardened his heart against the sound. Not real, he told himself. None of this is real, but he knew he was lying to himself. All of this was completely real. The hospital had secrets, and he was locked inside with them. The previous watchman had made it 3 weeks. How many nights like this had it taken before he quit? What had he seen that finally drove him away? 6 a.m. arrived like salvation. His watch beeped, and the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows. The crying outside the door stopped. The sounds throughout the building faded and died. He checked the monitors and saw empty hallways again. No figures, no patients, just vacant corridors and dark rooms. He waited an additional 15 minutes before unlocking the door. When he finally opened it and stepped into the hallway, the hospital was silent and still. Every door was closed. The elevator doors were shut. There was no evidence of the night's activities at all. He left quickly, noting the completion of his shift in the logbook with hands that still trembled. The morning air outside tasted impossibly sweet and clean. He sat in his car for several minutes before starting the engine, gathering himself. 3 nights down. How many more could he endure? The 4th night nearly broke him. He arrived at the hospital with a sense of doom, knowing it would be worse than the previous nights. The pattern was clear. Each night escalated beyond the last. He had reached a point where he could predict the acceleration, even if he could not predict the specifics. The rules waited on the clipboard. He noticed for the first time that there was writing on the back of the page. He flipped it over and found a handwritten note in different handwriting than the rules themselves. It read, "If you make it past the first week, talk to management about revised protocols. There are ways to manage them. I am sorry I left without explaining. I could not face another night. Good luck." It was signed with initials he did not recognize. Revised protocols. Ways to manage them. He read the note 3 times, committing it to memory. If he survived until the end of his first week, he would have questions for the hiring manager. So many questions. The 11 p.m. round revealed that the hospital had stopped pretending. Every patient room door stood wide open. The darkness beyond each doorway seemed to writhe and shift. He did not bother trying to close them. There were too many, and he knew they would just open again. He walked the hallways, completing his route mechanically, trying not to look into any of the open rooms. He failed at that last goal on the 3rd floor. His peripheral vision caught movement in one of the rooms, and he turned his head before he could stop himself. The flashlight beam illuminated the interior of the patient room. A figure stood next to the bed, hospital gown stained and torn. The face turned toward him, and he saw features that were not quite right. Eyes too large, mouth too wide, skin the color of old paper. The figure smiled, showing too many teeth. He turned away and kept walking. His mind tried to reject what he had seen, categorizing it as impossible. But impossible things had been happening all week. He no longer had the luxury of disbelief. The midnight round took him past the elevator again. The doors were open, the car waiting. The interior was empty, but the light was on. As he passed, the elevator dinged softly, the sound of arriving at a requested floor. An invitation. He did not accept it. The 1M round introduced a new element. As he climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, he found wet footprints on the steps, bare feet small like a child. The prints led upward toward the psychiatric ward. He followed them, though every instinct screamed at him to turn back. The 4th floor hallway was flooded. Water covered the floor, 2 inches deep, cold and dark. The source was unclear. The wet footprints continued down the hallway, weaving between the doors. He followed them, water soaking into his shoes with each step. The trail ended at one of the doors marked with a red symbol. The door with the red symbol was open. This violated Rule 2. He should close it without looking inside. But the water was flowing from this room, pouring out into the hallway in a steady stream. He could not close the door without stopping the water first. Or could he? The rules did not account for this situation. He approached the doorway slowly. The room beyond was dark, but he could hear the sound of running water from within. He shined his flashlight through the doorway, keeping himself in the hall. The room contained a hospital bed and medical equipment, the same as any other patient room. But the far wall was covered in dark stains that dripped and ran, creating the flow of water across the floor. Not water, he realized. The liquid was too dark, too thick. He backed away from the doorway without closing the door. The 2 a.m. round was abandoned after he found the basement door standing open, the stairwell that led down below the 1st floor, which was supposed to remain locked at all times, gaped onto the hallway. Cold air flowed up from below, carrying the smell of damp earth and decay. Rule 7 stated he was forbidden from entering the basement. It said nothing about what to do if the basement door was open. He closed the door firmly and tested the lock. It clicked into place, apparently secure. He made a note in the logbook and remained in the security office for the rest of the night, watching the monitors show him things he wished he could unsee. Figures walked the hallways in groups now. They gathered in certain rooms, congregating around beds or medical equipment. They stood in front of the security cameras, staring directly into the lens. Some of them waved. The gesture was friendly, but the faces were not. Distorted features, wrong proportions, mouths that moved but made no sound he could hear through the cameras. At 4 a.m., something knocked on the security office door. A measured, polite knock. 3 raps, a pause, then 3 more. The knock of someone who expected to be answered. He remained silent, watching the monitors. No one was visible in the first-floor hallway outside his door. But the knock came again. Same pattern, same volume. "Night Watchman," a voice called. Male this time, older, rough with disuse. "We need to speak with you about your performance. You have not been following the rules correctly. We have concerns." The voice sounded almost reasonable, almost official. The sort of voice that delivered bad news in a professional manner. He checked the rules again, reading them frantically. He had followed every instruction. He had done exactly what the protocols demanded, remaining in the office when he saw other people, not entering patient rooms, ignoring voices, avoiding the basement. He had been compliant. "You closed the doors," the voice said, as if reading his thoughts. "Rule 2 states you should close open doors without looking inside. But you looked. On the 3rd floor. You saw him. That was a violation. Now we must discuss consequences." His blood turned to ice. It was true. He had looked into the room on the 3rd floor. He had seen the figure with the wrong face. The rules had been broken, and now something was demanding accountability. "I did not mean to," he said aloud, before he could stop himself. Speaking to the voice was probably a mistake, but the words came out automatically. "It was an accident. My eyes moved before I could control them." Silence from the hallway. Then a low chuckle, papery and dry. "Intent is irrelevant. Rules exist for your protection. When they are broken, protection is forfeit. We will come for you at the end of your shift. Be ready." 6 a.m. came, and the usual silence fell over the hospital. But this time, it felt different. Not peaceful, but expectant, like the building was holding its breath, waiting for something. He left the security office cautiously, checking the hallway in both directions. Empty. He walked to the exit quickly, fighting the urge to run. As he pushed through the front doors into the gray morning light, he heard footsteps behind him in the lobby, moving fast. He did not look back. He ran to his car, fumbled with the keys, and drove away with his heart hammering. In the rearview mirror, he saw a figure standing in the hospital entrance, watching him leave, waiting for his return. He spent the day trying to decide whether to quit. The pay meant nothing if he did not survive to spend it, but quitting meant admitting defeat, and some stubborn part of him refused to give up after only 4 nights. The previous watchman had made it 3 weeks. He could at least match that. There was also the note on the back of the rules, revised protocols that could help manage them. If such protocols existed, they represented a way to survive, a method to coexist With whatever haunted St. Catherine's, he decided to return for his 5th night and see if he could make it to the end of the week. The 5th night brought desperation. He arrived at the hospital with a plan. He would follow the rules perfectly. Every instruction would be obeyed to the letter. He would give them no reason to claim violations. No more accidental glances into rooms. No more responses to voices. Total compliance. The 11 p.m. round went according to plan. Closed doors remained closed. Open doors were closed without looking inside. He kept his eyes forward, maintained his pace, and completed the route in 18 minutes. Back in the security office, he made his log entry with a sense of cautious optimism. The midnight round destroyed that optimism. As he climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, he heard a child crying. The sound came from above, echoing down the stairwell. Rule 3 stated he should ignore voices, but was crying a voice? The distinction suddenly seemed critically important. He continued up to the 2nd floor, trying to block out the sound. But it followed him, growing louder. A child in distress, sobbing and calling for help. The sound pulled at something primal in him, an instinct to respond to a helpless person in need. He clenched his teeth and kept walking, hating himself but following the rules. The crying stopped when he reached the 3rd floor. In its place came laughter from behind the closed doors, multiple voices, adults and children, laughing at some shared joke. The laughter had a cruel edge, mocking and harsh. He understood the joke suddenly. He was the joke. His fear and compliance and desperate adherence to rules that might not even protect him. All of it was entertainment for whatever inhabited this place. The 4th floor was quiet for the first time. He walked the psychiatric ward hallway in silence, his footsteps the only sound. The doors were all closed, nothing pressed against the windows. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by simple emptiness. It should have been a relief, but it felt more like a trap. The hospital was capable of subtlety, he realized. It could lull him into lowering his guard just as easily as it could terrify him. At 2 a.m., the monitors went dark again. Not static this time, just black. The screens were active, but showed nothing. He sat in the dark office, flashlight in hand, and waited. Without the monitors, he was blind to everything beyond his small room. The building could be filling with figures, and he would not know until they reached his door. The scratching started at 2:15 a.m. Not at his door, this time, but at the walls, coming from inside the walls. Something was moving through the spaces between the rooms, crawling through the infrastructure of the building. The scratching circled the security office, moving from wall to wall, testing the perimeter, looking for a way in. He stood in the center of the room, turning slowly to track the sounds. The scratching stopped at the wall behind the desk, directly behind where he had been sitting. A soft thump, like something settling into position. Then silence. He remained standing for the next 4 hours. His legs ached and his back cramped, but he did not sit down. He did not trust the wall behind the desk anymore. Whatever had been in there might still be present, waiting for him to relax and turn his back. At 6 a.m., the monitors flickered back to life. The screens showed normal hallway views, empty and still and ordinary. His shift was over. He had survived the 5th night. 2 more nights, and he would complete his first week. Then he could demand answers about the revised protocols. The 6th night tested him in a new way. When he arrived at the hospital, he found the front door locked. He had to use the key the hiring manager had given him, which he had not needed to use before. The door had always been open on previous nights. This change in pattern made him nervous. The security office was dark when he entered. The desk lamp that had always been on was switched off. He turned it on manually and found the thermos of coffee was missing. Small changes, but they added up to a message. The hospital was withholding the minor comforts it had previously provided. He was not welcome here, but he had to stay anyway. The contradiction was deliberate. The rules clipboard sat on the desk, as always. He picked it up and found that the list had changed. New lines had been added in the same handwriting as the original rules. The additions were not numbered, simply inserted between the existing rules as if they had always been there. One new rule stated that if he found a door locked that should be open, he was not to attempt to unlock it. Another specified that mirrors were to be avoided. If he saw his reflection, he should look away immediately. A third new rule instructed him to count the patient rooms on each floor during his rounds. If the number changed from one round to the next, he should note the discrepancy, but continue his patrol without investigating. The rules were evolving, adapting to his presence and his experiences. The hospital was teaching him how to survive within it, but the lessons came at the cost of exposure to increasingly dangerous situations. Each rule existed because someone had encountered the hazard it warned against. He was creating new protocols through his suffering. The 11 p.m. round revealed locked doors, not the patient rooms, which were irrelevant anyway, but the doors to the stairwells. Both the east and west stairwell doors on the first floor were locked from the inside, preventing access to the upper floors. He could not complete his rounds without using the stairs, but the new rule said not to attempt unlocking doors that should be open. He stood in the first floor hallway, trying to decide what to do. Skip the upper floors and remain on the first floor all night. That would violate the rounds protocol. Try to unlock the stairwell doors despite the new rule. That could have consequences he could not predict. He checked the elevator at the center of the hallway. The doors were closed, and presumably the car was still disabled. Not an option. After several minutes of deliberation, he decided to try the basement door. If the stairwells leading up were locked, perhaps the stairwell leading down was open. Rule 7 forbid him from entering the basement, but it said nothing about using the basement stairs to access the upper floors. The hospital had multiple staircases. Maybe one of them connected all the levels. The basement door was unlocked. It opened easily, revealing concrete steps descending into darkness below. But next to the descending stairs, another staircase led upward. A service stairwell that connected the basement to the upper floors. He had found his route. He climbed the service stairs carefully. They were narrower than the main stairwells, with lower ceilings and no emergency lighting. His flashlight beam seemed inadequate in the claustrophobic space. The stairs opened onto the second floor through a service door, which was unlocked. He completed his rounds using the service stairwell, climbing from floor to floor through the dark, narrow space. Each time he passed the landing that led down to the basement, he felt the pull of that forbidden space. Cold air and strange smells wafted up from below. Something was down there that the rules wanted him to avoid, something worse than what walked the upper floors. At midnight, all the patient room doors were open again. But this time, the rooms were not empty. Each one contained a figure lying in the bed, covered by sheets. The figures were motionless, but he could see them breathing. The sheets rose and fell with slow respiration. The hospital was populated now, every room occupied. He walked past the open doors without looking directly into the rooms. His peripheral vision caught glimpses of the figures in the beds. Some of them had faces. Others did not. He completed the round as quickly as possible, using the service stairs to move between floors. The one round brought him face to face with a new violation. On the third floor, he passed a mirror hanging in the hallway. He had not noticed it on previous rounds, but it was clearly old, the glass cloudy with age. The new rule said to avoid mirrors and not look at reflections. He kept his eyes forward and walked past without looking. But as he passed, he heard his own voice coming from the direction of the mirror. "Help me," his voice said. "I am trapped. Please help me." He did not turn around. He did not look. He kept walking. "You left me here," his voice continued, following him down the hallway. "You went home every morning and left me in this place. I am still here. I never left. You abandoned me." The words made no sense, but they burrowed into his mind anyway, seeds of doubt and guilt. He reached the service stairs and climbed to the fourth floor, leaving the voice behind, but he could still hear it echoing in his memory. The hospital was using his own voice against him now, trying to make him believe he had been here before, that some part of him had never left. It was psychological warfare, and he had no defense except stubborn refusal to believe. At 2 a.m., he found the first discrepancy the new rule had warned about. The second floor had too many doors. He had counted patient rooms on each round as instructed. The second floor should have 20 doors, 10 on each side of the hallway. But now it had 23. 3 extra rooms had appeared, their doors closed and unmarked. He noted the discrepancy in his mental log and continued his round. The new rule said not to investigate such changes. The hospital was expanding or contracting, adding and removing spaces according to some internal logic, trying to understand that logic would drive him insane. The rest of the night passed in a blur of rounds and avoidance. He followed every rule perfectly, gave in to no temptations to look or investigate or respond. At 6 a.m., he left the hospital exhausted but intact. One more night. If he survived the 7th night, he would complete his first week and earn the right to demand better protocols. The 7th night arrived with a sense of finality. He entered the hospital knowing this would be his last chance to prove he could handle the job. If he failed tonight, he would quit. If he succeeded, he would insist on answers and better protections before continuing. The security office was a mess. Papers scattered across the desk. The chair overturned. The monitors cracked and damaged. Someone or something had torn through the space, destroying everything they could reach. The clipboard with the rules was missing entirely. He searched the office thoroughly, but could not find the rules list. Without the rules, he had no protocols to follow, no guidelines for survival. He was on his own, armed only with the knowledge he had accumulated over the previous 6 nights. He decided to conduct his rounds based on memory of the original rules. Stay out of patient rooms. Ignore voices. Avoid the basement. Use the service stairs, since the main stairwells might still be locked. Complete the route once per hour. Simple and straightforward. The 11 p.m. round revealed chaos throughout the hospital. Doors were open and closed in random patterns. Figures walked the hallways openly, no longer hiding or lurking. They ignored him as he passed, going about their own inexplicable business. Patients checking themselves into rooms. Staff members in stained scrubs pushing gurneys. Doctors making rounds with clipboards. The hospital was operating again, 15 years after closing, populated by people who were not quite people. He moved through the active hallways like a ghost, unseen and unacknowledged. The figures passed within inches of him without reaction. He was in their space, but they acted as if he did not exist. The realization was both comforting and disturbing. He was irrelevant to whatever played out around him, unless he interfered or drew attention. The midnight round took him past the elevator. The doors were open, and the car was full of people. They stood pressed together, facing the back wall, silent and still. The elevator dinged, and the doors began to close. On impulse, he stuck his hand out to stop them. The doors reversed and opened again. The people in the car turned to look at him in unison. Wrong faces, wrong eyes. He pulled his hand back, and the doors closed, the car descending toward the basement. He had drawn attention, broken his anonymity. The figures in the hallways would notice him now. He hurried to complete his round and return to the questionable safety of the security office. At 1 a.m., they found him. He was conducting his round on the third floor when he heard footsteps behind him. Multiple sets, moving in unison. He did not turn around. He kept walking at his normal pace. The footsteps matched his speed, staying close, but not catching up. A voice spoke from the group behind him. "Night Watchman, you have completed 6 nights. You have learned the patterns. You understand the rules even without the list. But tonight, we offer a choice." The voice was neither male nor female, a blend of multiple tones speaking in harmony. He said nothing, kept walking. The footsteps continued to follow. "You can leave now," the voice continued. "Walk out the front door and never return. Find employment elsewhere. Forget what you have seen here. We will not follow. We will not pursue. You will be free." It was tempting. More tempting than anything they had offered before. Freedom and escape, and the promise of being left alone. But there was always a second option in these situations. A price for staying. Or, the voice said, confirming his expectation, "You can remain. Complete your week. Prove you can coexist with us. In exchange, we will give you true sight, understanding of what we are and why we persist, knowledge of how to navigate this place safely. You will become something more than a simple watchman. You will become a keeper of thresholds, a guardian of the boundary between what was and what remains." He reached the service stairs and stopped walking. The footsteps behind him stopped as well. He turned slowly to face the group. 7 figures stood in the hallway. Hospital gowns and scrubs, and the tattered remains of street clothes. Their faces were clearer now, less distorted. He recognized some of them from missing persons reports he had seen in newspapers over the years. People who had disappeared near the hospital, patients who had never been discharged, staff who had failed to return home one day. "Why me?" he asked. "Why offer this choice now?" The 7 figures smiled simultaneously, an eerie, synchronized expression. "Because you have potential. Most people break after 3 or 4 nights. They run screaming or quit without explanation. But you have persisted despite your fear. You follow rules even when you do not understand their purpose. These are valuable traits in a keeper." He considered his options. Leave now and spend the rest of his life wondering what he had refused. Or stay and accept whatever transformation they offered, becoming something other than what he was. Both choices carried costs he could not fully calculate. "I will stay," he said. "I will complete my week." The figures nodded in unison. "Then finish your rounds. We will find you when your shift ends. The transition will be painful, but brief. You will understand everything soon." They turned and walked away down the hallway, their footsteps fading into the distance. He completed his remaining rounds in a daze. The hospital felt different now, less hostile and more neutral. The figures he passed no longer seemed threatening. They were simply present, existing in their own layer of reality that happened to overlap with his. He was seeing the place as it truly was, a space where the past had never fully released its hold. At 6 a.m., he returned to the wrecked security office and waited. The 7 figures appeared in the doorway, backlit by the gray dawn light. They entered the office and surrounded him. One of them produced a small object, a key on a tarnished chain. "This opens every door in the hospital," the figure said, handing him the key. "You will need it for your expanded duties. As keeper, you will maintain the boundaries. Ensure that what belongs here stays here. Prevent outsiders from stumbling into spaces they cannot survive. Guide those who can be guided. Contain those who cannot." Another figure handed him a new clipboard. This one held multiple pages covered in dense handwriting. Rules and protocols far more extensive than the simple list he had been following. Instructions for every situation and contingency. A manual for surviving and managing the impossible. "The pain comes now," the first figure said. "We must mark you so that all in this place recognize your authority. Hold still." They reached out and touched him simultaneously. 7 points of contact, 7 burning brands. He screamed as something fundamental changed in his perception. The walls of the security office became transparent, revealing the spaces behind and between. The building opened itself to his new sight, showing him every room and hallway and hidden passage. He saw the basement in all its horror. He saw the 4th floor's true nature. He saw what walked the hallways and understood what they had been and what they had become. The pain faded slowly, leaving him gasping on the floor of the office. The 7 figures withdrew their hands. His vision returned to normal, but he retained the knowledge they had given him. He understood the hospital now in a way that went beyond mere observation. He could feel its rhythms and moods. He knew where every figure was at any given moment. He sensed the weak points in the boundaries and the places where reality grew thin. "You are keeper now," the figures said in unison. "Return tonight to begin your true duties. Your training week is complete." They filed out of the office and disappeared into the building's depths. He sat on the floor for a long time, processing what had happened. He had been changed, marked, transformed into something that stood between the world of the living and the space that St. Catherine's had become. He should have felt horror or regret. Instead, he felt only a strange sense of purpose. He had been given a role that mattered, a responsibility that few could handle. When he finally stood and left the hospital, the morning sun felt different on his skin. Sharper, more real. He drove home with the new clipboard on the passenger seat, its pages full of secrets he had yet to fully explore. That night, he would return, not as a frightened night watchman following rules he did not understand, but as a keeper who knew exactly what he was protecting and why. The job posting had been simple. Night watchman needed for abandoned hospital property. What it had not mentioned was that the hospital was far from abandoned. What it had not specified was that the position came with a transformation, but he had accepted the terms knowingly or not, and now he would fulfill his duties. The boundaries would be maintained. The dead would be managed. The threshold would be guarded, and St. Catherine's would continue its strange existence, watched over by someone who finally understood its nature. He returned that night, and every night after, no longer afraid, but forever changed. The hospital became his domain, and he became its keeper. Some jobs required more than a resume and a willingness to work overnight hours. Some jobs required sacrifice and transformation. Some jobs changed who you were at a fundamental level. He had accepted such a job, and he would see it through to whatever end awaited him in the dark hallways of St. Catherine's Medical Center.